I created a NFC URL called John. So I've created a NFC called URL John. When John, then the NFC gets redirected to this place here. So at this point, there's no, when we landed on this page, there was no business on the page, and there was no business called John in the database. So what happened at that point was we created a new business because there was no business on the page, and we weren't able to find, we searched for a business with that URL had come in, and we couldn't find that. So because the page was empty and because there was no URL in the database, we created a new one, and then we redirected them to the same page again, but the data we sent was the business we just created, and replaced the entry in the history. So that's when it's totally new. If I came to that URL again, but I'd already been through this process where the page was empty, but I was already in the database, I go to the page again, but I set myself on the page, and I replace the entry. Then once I'm on that page, if I edit the name of that business, I set the status to created because from new, so I know that I've now added a business name. I set the thing slug, I reset the page, and then I redirect. I go to the page with the new slug. So if you put that all together, I create a new thing called Harry. I come to my NFC URL Harry page. That's my NFC URL. I'm going to change my business to Harry's Coffee. I'm changing my name to Harry's Coffee. That's my business name. I'm now setting the slug and redirecting, so the page now says Harry's Coffee. So if I go to the NFC URL, it'll come. We know who you're talking about. And if I go to the bubble slug URL, I know who we're talking about. So if I go this is my NFC URL over here. If I go over into a new incognito window, I'd expect this to know who I am and let me start editing. So Harry's Coffee. So I'm editing Harry's Coffee because I was already in the database. This URL was already in the database. This NFC URL was already in the database. So that's good. That's what I hoped would happen. And obviously if I go to the bubble slug URL, I'd expect it to go to Harry's Coffee as well. And let's just test that. So if I go, this is the bubbles slug, and we come into Harry's Coffee. So I think that's doing exactly what you want, and it's a little bit, this page loader is a bit complicated in here. You have to study this, how this works, and even though it says go to page, because it's bubble, it doesn't really refresh the page. It just changes the URL because it's actually just changing the back end state it states. So I think that does what you want, I think.